Hello, I welcome you all on behalf of Dadar CP Study Circle. I welcome you all on behalf of Dadar CP Circle. Today we have a session on recovery, attachment and blocking of ITC under GST. I welcome the speaker of the day, CA Deep Rasmin Chheda. Hello.
Girish bhai, go ahead.
I request Disha Shah to give the intro of the speaker, CA Deep Chheda.
Good evening, everyone, all the members. Thank you, Girish bhai, for this opportunity, for allowing me to introduce our learned speaker, CA Deep Rasmin Chheda. He is an associate of SS Gupta since 3 years. He is working in the field of indirect taxation, providing service of consultancy, litigation, and compliance to clients in varied fields of the like construction, renewable energy, manufacturing, engineering, sports boards, and pharmaceuticals. So, with this short introduction, I would like everyone to give a huge welcome to CA Chheda, and I request Deep sir to take over the dais and start the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Disha. Thank you for your kind words. I would like to first of all take this opportunity to thank Girish bhai, Sanjay bhai, and Dadari CP Circle for giving me this opportunity to come here and address you all. And I would also like to express my gratitude towards the senior members of the fraternity, my colleagues, and all the friends who have taken time out of their busy schedules on a weekend, and come here to listen to me. And without wasting much time, I would like to start on this topic. It is almost 3 years since GST has been introduced in the country. Still, it is somehow in the nascent stage with a lot of complications, even regarding basic taxation, eligibility of ITC, filing of returns, changing due dates, the uncertainty about the annual returns, GST audit, etc., etc. So even after 3 years, the trade and industry is still facing difficulty in addressing the challenges faced in the new GST regime. And among these changes that have been ushered in, department is also very active in terms of recovering the tax that is supposed to be levied, and issuing notices and starting the adjudication processes. Today, I want to discuss a very important subject which I think has not been much spoken about, and that is why I want to address this topic today. How does the department actually recover the tax? If they have issued you a notice, the notice has been adjudicated, and it has been held by the department that tax is payable by the assessee, or even when the proceedings have been initiated and the order has not yet been passed, but department is of the view that there is a risk that we may not be able to recover the tax which is chargeable on the assessee. In those scenarios, how does the department actually safeguard its interest? How does the department ensure that it does not lose out on revenue which is legally payable by the assessee? There are 3 areas where the department can actually do this. One is recovery proceedings under section 78 and section 79. Second is provisional attachment under section 83 while the proceedings are ongoing, and the order is not passed, the department can provisionally attach the movable and immovable property of the assessee if it is of the opinion that it is necessary to do so. And third is blocking of input tax credit under Rule 86A. First, I would start with recovery proceedings under Section 78 and 79. Section 78 of the CGST Act says that whenever any amount becomes payable under the Act by the assessee to the government and he has not paid this amount should be paid within 3 months from the date when the order for such payment has been passed. If the assessee fails to make the payment, then recovery proceedings under Section 79 will be initiated against the assessee. So say for example, an order has been passed on 1st February 2020 against one Mr. A, in which it has been held by the adjudicating officer, the proper officer under GST, that Mr. A is supposed to pay 1 lakh rupees of tax. However, he is not paid, so a demand for rupees 1 lakh along with interest and penalty is confirmed on Mr. A in the order. According to Section 78, the assessee will have a period of 3 months from the date of 1st February, that is up to 30th April, to pay the tax. If he does not pay the tax by 30th April, then department will initiate recovery proceedings under Section 79. Notice for recovery is an important document which is issued. Earlier, what used to happen was once the order is passed, the department would wait for 2 months, 3 months. And if you are not paying the tax or if you have not filed an appeal against the order, then a notice for recovery will be issued to the assessee. Under GST, however, the things are a bit different. When the assessee is passing, when the assessing officer, in fact, is passing an order, he will pass an order under DRC 07. And in that order, he will give the details of the tax that is payable by the assessee, the interest on such delayed payment of tax, and if any penalty he has levied on the assessee for not complying with any sections of the Act. This order will be passed in DRC 07. Rule 142.6 of the CGST rules deems that this order which is passed by the assessing officer in DRC 07 is also a notice for recovery. So a separate notice for recovery will not be issued to the assessee. The order which is issued for confirming the tax liability will also deemed to be the notice under CGST Rule 142. So the period of 3 months will immediately start on the date the order is served upon the assessee and tax will have to be paid. If the assessee pays the amount, then nothing will be done. If the assessee files the appeal, even then no recovery proceedings will be initiated. However, if assessee takes no action on the order and ignores it or willingly chooses to ignore it, then recovery proceedings under Section 79 will be initiated by the proper officer. Now, what are the modes by which the department can actually recover the tax? Section 79 enlists 6 modes by which the department can recover tax from an assessee. First, if any amount is payable by the department to the assessee, for example, a refund has been applied by the assessee, the refund has been sanctioned by the department, but simultaneously the assessee has even defaulted in payment of tax in some other case or in a parallel proceeding. In that case, the department can actually recover the tax amount which has been defaulted from the refund sanctioned to the assessee under Section 79(1)(a). Second mode of recovery available to the department is department may have seized some goods during the seizure proceedings or during some other proceedings under the Act. Department can auction off these goods which are under the control of the proper officer or any other officer of the department. They can sell those goods and they can recover the money. Third option available to the department is recover the money from any third person who holds the money on behalf of the assessee or who owes any money to the assessee. Fourth option is the department can seize any movable or immovable property which belongs to the defaulter. They can seize it and auction the property and recover that money. Fifth option is they can ask the district collector in which the defaulter is residing or in which district he carries on his business. The district collector can recover that amount as if it was an arrear of the land revenue, or the officer can file an application with the relevant magistrate and the magistrate will recover it as if it is a fine imposed by the magistrate. Out of these 6 options available, 3 are very relevant. One is 79(1)(b), selling the goods which are under the control of the officer, recovery from the third person, or seizure of any movable or immovable property. And we will discuss those options in detail. Before, however, going to that, I will like to discuss an important amendment made in Section 79. On 1st February 2019, an amendment was brought by way of an explanation to Section 79. And the explanation said that wherever any reference to a person is made under Section 79, it should also include a distinct person. Now, first of all, what is a distinct person? Whenever an assessee is carrying on business in more than one state, say I have an office in Maharashtra from where I'm selling the goods, as well as I have an office in Gujarat from where I'm selling the goods. So under Section 25 of the CGST Act, both these offices will be deemed to be distinct entities, distinct persons of the same person. So for the purpose of tax collection, these will be considered as 2 separate persons. However, by inserting this application, it has been made clear by the government that though for the purpose of taxation, you may be a distinct person, but for recovery, you are one and the same person. So what is the impact of this? The impact is clear that whenever if one state office or an office in one state defaults on payment of tax, the government has been empowered by the legislature to recover that tax from the distinct person who is operating in another state. So if I have defaulted of tax payment in Maharashtra, government can recover that amount from my office located in Gujarat. I cannot say that no, I have winded up my business in Maharashtra. Now I'm in Gujarat. For Section 25, both the places are distinct entities under GST, so you cannot recover that tax. That option is not available to the defaulter. Government will say no, nothing doing. Under 79, we have the power, and we will recover the tax from your Gujarat property. So this is an important amendment. Continuing to the modes of recovery. First mode of recovery that I will be discussing is recovery by selling of goods. Section 79(1)(b) allows the officer to sell any goods which belong to the defaulter and are already under the control of the officer. He can auction those goods and he can recover the money which has been defaulted by me. First, he has to create a list of the goods that is under his control. He has to bring out an estimate of the market value of those goods and issue a notice to me that these goods are being attached and they will be auctioned. One controversy here is the definition of goods. The term goods under Section 2(52) of CGST Act means any kind of movable goods other than money and security. So the plant and machinery can also be a good. A vehicle of the company which is used to transport stock can also be a good. Computers installed at the headquarters, that can also be a good. So that is the lack of clarity over here in Section 79(1)(b) as to whether the goods means any movable asset of the assessee or the stock in which he is dealing. In my personal opinion, it is the stock in which I am dealing. If I'm a trader of mobile or a manufacturer of mobile phones, then they can sell the mobile phones and auction the mobile phones under 79(1)(b). Or if I'm a manufacturer of, say, stationery items, then those stationery items, and so on and so forth. And this is a mere clarification that needs to be brought in. But yeah, there is fair bit of lack of clarity over here. The section also says, the rules also say that the proper officer will be allowed to sell only so much of goods as are required to recover the tax defaulted by me and recovery of the administrative expenses of such recovery. So say for example, I have defaulted of tax amount of rupees 5 lakhs and recovery proceedings have caused the department another 50,000 administrative expenses of the recovery. So total recovery that the department can make is 5,50,000. However, they under their control, they have goods worth rupees 10 lakhs belonging to me under their control, which they want to auction. Rule says you can only auction so much of goods as are required to recover 5,50,000. Anything over and above that which is under your control, you have to give it back to the assessee. When the notice of auction is issued, there has to be a period of 15 days between issuing the notice of auction and conducting the actual auction. However, when the goods are in the nature of perishable or hazardous goods, then the proper officer has the option to conduct the auction forthwith. He need not wait for the period of 15 days to get over. The assessee who has defaulted also has the option. He can pay the tax before the auction is conducted. And in that case, the auction will be cancelled and the goods will be returned back to him. So this is the procedural aspect for recovery by selling of goods which belong to the defaulter. Second mode of recovery that I want to discuss, and is a very common and frequent mode of recovery which is being undertaken by the department. It is one of the most favored option of the department. It is recovery from third person. Section 79(1)(c) says that the proper officer can recover the tax defaulted from any person who holds the money on behalf of the defaulter, who owes the money to the defaulter, or in the future is going to hold the money for the defaulter or owe the money to the defaulter. So what does this mean? Who are these people? It includes trade debtors to whom I have sold the goods on credit and they owe me the money for those goods. It could be the bank account, who holds the money, bank holds the money on my account. Any advances that I may have given to my relative, to a friend, which may become payable to me in the future. So the proper officer has an option to recover money from any of these persons by issuing a notice in form DRC 13. And when such notice is issued to a person, the debtor, the bank, or the relative, whosoever person, he has no option under the law but to comply with the notice. He cannot say that, no, I don't owe any money to the government. I owe money to Mr. Deep and I will make the payment only to Mr. Deep, not to the government. He cannot say that. He will have to compulsorily, bound by law, have to make the payment to the government. If he chooses to not make the payment to the government, then even he will be considered to be a defaulter under Section 78. And recovery proceedings under Section 79 will be initiated against that person. So the bank or the debtor, he has no option but to make the payment to the government if a notice has been issued to him. If he makes that payment, the government acknowledges that payment. The Act says that if I have defaulted and my debtor or my bank has made the payment to the government because a notice has been issued, then the law will assume that his liability towards me, the bank's liability towards me, or the debtor's liability towards me has been discharged and he need not make further payment to me. Government will also issue him a certificate to that extent in form DRC 14. Okay, so it is as good as he is making a payment to me via the government, like TDS, where TDS is deposited to the government instead of making payment to the contractor or the employee or a professional. Instead of making payment to that person, we, by way of TDS, we deposit it to the government and the liability is discharged. This is also a similar concept. Third person will make payment to the government and it will be considered that his liability towards me has been discharged to that extent. However, if the notice has been issued and after that notice he willingly chooses to ignore the notice and still make the payment to me, a notice has been issued to him on 1st of June. On 5th of June, he decides that no, this notice is bunkus. The department को कुछ पता नहीं है. मेरा contract Deep के साथ है. I will make the payment to Deep on 5th of June and get away with my liability and done. I don't need to do anything more. Act says no. If you do that, then it's okay if you have made the payment to him. You will still continue to be personally liable under Section 79 to make the payment to the government. So if I choose to ignore that notice willingly, then I will have to make double payment. One to the person to whom I owe the money and once to the government. Now, why is this important? Any of your client or you yourself, your bank, anyone could get a notice that person XYZ has defaulted on payment of tax, and please make the payment on their behalf. It may be possible that probably you have not defaulted, you have made the payment, but due to whatever reason, by oversight, the payment has not been considered by the department, or you have intimated the department and the letter has been lost in some file. In those scenarios, it is very, very important that the government knows that you're making the payment. If the government doesn't know that you're making the payment, this is the most preferred option that they choose to exercise. And bank or the debtor will have no option but to comply with that notice, and you would have made double payment of tax. One option, however, available to the debtor or to the bank is that they can prove to the department that on the date of the notice, I do not owe anything to the defaulter. They can give evidence, they must give evidence to that regard by way of a ledger copy, a CA certificate, bank statement, payment advice, anything, any evidence that is genuine, honest, bona fide must be submitted to the officer. If the officer is satisfied with your submissions, he will revoke the notice, and you no longer need to pay the amount to the government. Let us discuss these concepts a bit further by way of example. Mr. A has defaulted in payment of tax to the tune of rupees 1 lakh to the government. On 1st of June 2020, the government has issued a notice to Mr. B. Mr. B owes rupees 2 lakhs to Mr. A. How much money can the government recover from Mr. B under section 79(1)(c)? The act is very clear in this regard. The officer is allowed to recover only so much money as has been defaulted by the taxpayer. In this case, the taxpayer has defaulted to the tune of rupees 1 lakh, and department can recover only 1 lakh. They cannot say that you pay us to entire 2 lakhs, we will appropriate 1 lakh towards the tax and 1 lakh we will repay to the assessee, or we will adjust it against some other dues which may be payable by him. The officer cannot do that. He can only recover 1 lakh rupees. Another example, similar example, a small change in the fact. Even here, Mr. A has defaulted to the tune of 1 lakh. Department on 1st of June 2020 has issued a notice to Mr. B. However, in this case, Mr. B owes only rupees 50,000 to Mr. A. He does not owe 2 lakhs, he owes only 50,000. In this case, the department can only recover rupees 50,000 from Mr. B. The department cannot say he has defaulted for 1 lakh, so you pay me entire 1 lakh, बाकी आप हिसाब उसके साथ देख लो, मुझे नहीं पता ये सब. The department cannot do that. They can only recover up to 50,000. This is the case where Mr. A is complying. Department will issue a certificate to them that you have discharged your liability, you have paid your liability, and you need not make any further payment to Mr. A to that extent. They will issue DRC 14. However, what happens if Mr. B does not owe any money to Mr. A? It was a fact that he owed the money. Notice was issued on 1st of June. However, he makes a submission to the officer that, sir, on 30th May 2020, before a notice was issued to me, I have already paid the amount to Mr. A. Here is the copy of the ledger. This ledger copy is CA certified. This amount is also reflecting in my bank account. And I have made the NEFT or RTGS or check or whatever. This is the payment advice. In that case, the officer will have no option to recover from Mr. B, and Mr. B will have been discharged from his liability. He need not make any payment to the government. What happens if Mr. B willingly chooses to ignore the notice on 1st of June, or maybe by oversight misses out on the notice, and on 5th of June he makes the payment to Mr. A? As I discussed earlier, Act is very clear in that regard. It is okay if Mr. B has paid the money to Mr. A, whatever was owed by him. He will still be personally liable to pay to the government. So one, he has paid amount to his creditor. Now he will have to again pay to the department. And this is very crucial because in companies, the taxation department, the taxation wing of the company, and the finance wing, the payment wing, or the procurement department who looks after payment to vendors may be different. It may so happen that notice has been issued on 1st of June. By the time it comes in courier, it passes through security check at the watchman, comes in hand of the person in the taxation department, taxation in charge. It is 3rd of June, 4th of June, right? During lockdown now, it may take even more time for courier to come, to the post to come. And unaware of the notice being issued, the procurement department releases the payment to the vendor on 2nd of June, on 3rd of June. In these cases where it is not my intention to defraud the government, I am unaware of the notice to be issued, has been issued to me, I am making the payment. The act is unclear. What happens? It will be a very, very long fight to prove that it was my bona fide, that I have released the payment unknowingly, because the act does not make any difference between a bona fide payment and a mala fide payment. And to prove it that it was a bona fide payment and don't make me pay again because it will be a double cost to me, will be a bit difficult. So companies will have to ensure that the communication being received by the company from the tax department is very prompt. The communication regarding such withholding of payment is prompt. Otherwise, company may have to bear double cost. Now coming to the third mode of recovery, seizure of movable or immovable property. Section 79(1)(d) says that proper officer is allowed to seize any movable or any immovable property which belongs to the defaulter or is under the control of defaulter. Which belongs to the defaulter or is under the control of the defaulter. For seizing this property, the proper officer will first have to prepare a list of the movable and immovable properties that he intends to seize. An estimated market value of that property will have to be given. And an order of seizure will have to be passed in DRC 16, giving the exact details of the property that he intends to seize. Once that has been done, he should intimate the relevant revenue authorities if he is seizing an immovable property. He should inform the transport authorities, that is RTO, if he is seizing, say, a vehicle is impounding a luxury car owned by the defaulter, or any other relevant authority, that such I am seizing these goods of the assessee, of the defaulter. Please create an encumbrance on this property and do not allow this property to be removed or to be transferred to any other name till I give further orders allowing the same. This he will have to do immediately, and an encumbrance will be created on that property and that property will be seized. This property that has been seized will have to be sold by way of an auction. Again, a 15-day period will be there between the issue of notice and the conducting of auction. The person whose property has been seized shall have the option to file an objection to the proper officer, and he can make a representation to the proper officer that, sir, the property that you have seized either does not belong to the defaulter, it is not under the control of the defaulter, or any other valid reason that you believe that this property has been wrongly seized by the department. You file an objection to the proper officer, he will give you an hearing. You make him the representation, give him the valid evidence, proper documents that you believe are to be given, And if he is satisfied, he will release this property and he will not auction that property. However, if you do not file that objection before the auction is conducted, then the property will be auctioned and then there is nothing that you can do. If the defaulter whose property has been seized pays the amount before the conduct of auction, in that case the property will be released and the auction will be cancelled. Then no further, since the recovery has been done of the dues by payment of tax in cash, no further need for seizure arises and the property will be released back to the defaulter. Now this is a general rule for movable and immovable property. However, there are certain other properties which the government has identified for which a little separate procedure has been given. The first type of this is those goods which are owned by the assessee, owned by the defaulter, but in general, they are not in the possession of the defaulter. It could be an unsecured debt, a loan that he may have taken, a loan that he may have given, his investment in any other corporation, say for example a listed corporation where the shares are under his name, but they are deposited in dematerialized form with the custodian, with the depository, and they are not under the possession per se of the defaulter. Or any premises that he has given on rent, he owns that premises, but he is currently not under the possession of that premises, or any other vehicle, any other plant and machinery that he may have given on rent. Those properties are not under his possession. In that case also, order for attachment will be issued under section 16. However, the embargo here is, in case of debt, if I am the defaulter, my creditor cannot recover the debt, an unsecured debt from me. If I have given any loan to somebody, the debtor shall not be allowed to make the payment to me of the debt. However, the debtor will have the option, the person to whom I have given the loan, my debtor, will have the option to make the payment to the government, and that will be considered as discharge of his debt. So it is similar to amount recovered from third person. The treatment is similar over here as well. In case of shares held in a company, the transfer of shares will be stopped. Collection of dividend on those shares will not be allowed. And till the time the officer will issue further orders. And in case of any other property, the possession will not be allowed to be given back to the defaulter. Also, another criteria laid down here is, in case of shares, in case of negotiable instrument, these property need not be sold through an auction. They will be sold through brokers. Broker will sell it in the open market, and whatever money is collected will be deposited in the government treasury, and that will be considered as recovery of the property. Another very strange and a fair bit of controversial, in my opinion, is the share in a partnership. The interest of the defaulter held under in a partnership. Rule 153 says that the proper officer can charge the share of the defaulter in a partnership and the profit generated under that partnership. So if I am a partner in a partnership firm, my capital contribution, any remuneration, any interest generated on my capital, or the profits that are generated during the year, the entire gambit will be seized by the proper officer, and he will have the option to recover money from there. If the proper officer so believes it is appropriate to do, he can also appoint a receiver, because the books of the partnership firm will be closed at the end of the financial year. That is when the profits will be determined and distributed to the partner. Proper officer will say, I don't have so much time. I am appointing Mr. XYZ as the receiver. Whenever the books are closed, the profit audit is done, you collect that much, you collect the profit and deposit it with the government. What happens to the share of the other partners? Other partners will have the liberty to redeem their revenue, their portion of the profits, their share of interest from the partnership firm. And in case the proper officer makes a decision to sell the stake of the defaulter, then the other partners will have the option to buy that share from the proper officer and pay the money to the government. And that will be considered as a discharge of liability. One question, however, that arises in my mind is, Section 79(1)(d) allows the proper officer to auction any movable or an immovable property. That is the word of emphasis over here, the phrase of emphasis, a movable property or an immovable property. Now, how do you identify that this pen that I am holding is a movable property or an immovable property, or the building that I am residing currently is a movable property or an immovable property? In order to do that, first that property has to be tangible property. I need to be able to see that property, touch that property. Only then I can say that it is a movable property or an immovable property. Technical specifications apart, in a general parlance, in the common parlance, without seeing a property or without being able to touch it, I cannot say whether it is a movable property or an immovable property. A partnership firm per se is a fictitious entity. It is a legal entity. Of course, there is a partnership deed which governs the partnership, but barring that, there is no physical essence to the partnership firm. It is only on paper. The people working are working for a fictitious entity. It is a legal entity, legally recognized entity, but it is still a fictitious entity. How can you determine whether that property, that partnership firm, or my stake in the partnership firm is a movable property or an immovable property without being able to touch it or being able to see it? And that is why, in my humble opinion, a partnership firm is not a movable property or an immovable property, and my stake cannot be seized under it under Section 79(1)(d). And that is why Rule 153, which is allowing the proper officer to seize my stake in a partnership firm, is beyond the scope of Section 79(1)(d). However, this matter, I believe, is going to travel to the judiciary, and we will have to wait on what call judiciary takes on this matter. Now, when we are talking of movable or immovable property, Section 79(1)(d) says that the proper officer will be allowed to seize any property which belongs to the defaulter or is under the control of the defaulter. The extent of ownership in the property or the extent of control has not been given under the Act. If I own only 5% of the property, can it be said that I genuinely own the property? Or is the property under my control? Do I exercise a significant amount or ownership on that property? The answer is not there in the Act. One question raised is, when I'm purchasing a property by taking a bank loan, to the extent that the loan has not been paid, the ownership in essence remains with the bank. We all are aware that the bank will take the original agreement. I will have to sign a hypothecation deed. And to the extent of unpaid amount of the loan, that property cannot be said to be owned by me. It is partially owned by the bank, strictly speaking. So, even if the purchase agreement is in my name, I have hypothecated that much unpaid portion to the bank. In that case, can the department say that this property belongs to me or is under my control? When I have purchased a property jointly, like I mentioned, if I have 5% stake in the property or a 10% stake in the property, can it be said that I exercise significant control over that property? In my opinion, it is a very difficult question. It is a very confusing question. Similarly, a question arises for property that I may have taken on rent. A property on rent, I may be residing there or I may be conducting my business from there, can be said to be under my control, but I have no extent of ownership in that property. If the department were to seize that property, it will cause a serious injury to the landowner, who will be punished for no mistake of his. no error of his. He will be at a loss because of an action of somebody else. Can that be the intention of legislature? There is no clarity. The extent of ownership, the extent of control has not been given under the law. And the judiciary definitely will have to step in here because there is going to be a fair bit of controversy, in my opinion. And the judiciary will have to take a call on this. Now, once a recovery proceeding has been initiated, or an order, so to say, in fact, an order has been issued in which an amount payable has been determined for the assessee, what are his options? Before I go there, another important point that has been raised with the judiciary is recovery proceedings can be initiated only when adjudication has been done. A case had come with the Honorable Jharkhand High Court, filed by petitioner by the name of Mahadev Construction Company. The facts of the case are such that the appellant had filed the GSTR 3B with some delay. After at the time of filing of the return, he made payment of the tax. However, he did not make the payment of interest under Section 50. Department initiated recovery proceedings under Section 79. They issued a notice to the bank of the petitioner and said that he has defaulted, so you make the payment on his behalf. The matter traveled to the Honorable Jharkhand High Court. The Jharkhand High Court, in a very landmark judgment, has held that recovery under Section 79 can be initiated only when the amount payable has been determined by way of adjudication, whether it is under Section 73, under Section 74, or any other relevant section. Without adjudicating the amount that is payable, without considering the representations of the assessee, without giving him an opportunity of being heard, even if it is for a matter of interest, which may be considered as an automatic liability, even then you have to adjudicate the matter under 73 or 74. You have to pass an order confirming the amount of interest which is payable by the assessee, and only then you can initiate recovery proceedings. Now, this is a very important judgment because in my practical experience, a lot of notices have been issued to banks where the assessee has not paid interest under Section 50. Department has issued notice directly to the bank that your customer has defaulted and please pay. If you have good relations with the bank manager, he may send you a photo of the notice on WhatsApp. Otherwise, there is no intimation that you get other than a message that so much amount has been debited from your bank account, and you can run from pillar to post to identify on what basis that amount has been calculated. In those terms, this is a very important judgment because there may be a possibility that the calculation done by the department is incorrect, is grossly negligent of material fact, and they may recover more amount of money than is actually payable by the assessee. It can cause serious injury to the assessee in various ways. There are the permutations and combinations. The circumstances that can arise are innumerable, and therefore this judgment is a very, very favorable judgment and a very important judgment that needs to be considered by the department as well as the assessee. Moving forward, what sequence can the funds be disposed of by the department? Rule 154 says that once a recovery has been done by the proper officer, first the money will go towards the administrative cost of the recovery. Second, it will go to the tax amount payable by the defaulter. These two are mandatory recoveries. Till these two amounts are recovered, the recovery proceedings will continue. If during the recovery proceedings these two amounts are recovered and there is any excess balance remaining, then it will be appropriated towards any other amount which is payable by the defaulter under the Act, or any balances remaining, then it will be returned back to the defaulter. It is a very simple rule and it is a very obvious rule. Now that once that an order has been passed, what is the option available with the assessee? Once an order has been passed, a DRC 07 has been passed, and demand, interest and penalty has been confirmed on the assessee, what can the assessee do so that recovery proceedings are not initiated against the assessee? First and foremost thing that needs to be done is go through the order. It's a very basic thing. It is a very simple thing. Go through the order. Understand the basis on which the amount has been made, considered to be payable by the department, by the officer. Whether any submissions made by the assessee at the time of hearing, at the time of adjudication, in his reply to the show cause notice, those submissions have been considered, those submissions have been discussed. Any judgment of the superior courts has been considered by the authority. Whether any material fact has been considered or it has been ignored by the assessing officer, those facts first need to be determined. The order needs to be perused. These facts need to be determined, and based on those facts, a decision needs to be made first whether the basis considered, whether the demand confirmed on the assessee is correct or not, whether the demand is justified or it is not justified. If you believe that the demand is not justified, then an appeal under section 107 must be filed with the appellate authority. If you believe that the demand is justified, then pay the tax, interest and penalty as soon as possible before the expiry of 3 months. Because once the 3 month period is expired, then the department will not wait. They will initiate recovery proceedings. If, say, for example, there is liquidity problem, one of the examples is the ongoing lockdown has brought about liquidity problems on a lot of industries, a lot of assessees. In that case, the assessee has the option to make payment in installments. This option I will discuss in detail further. Fourth option is file an appeal against the recovery proceedings undertaken by the assessing officer. Section 107 says that where any person is aggrieved by any decision or order of the adjudicating officer, he can file an appeal with the appellate authority. Now, in the background of what we discussed right now, against what can an appeal be filed by the assessee if he wishes to do so? First is the demand that has been raised incorrectly, like we said. The basis considered by the assessing officer is incorrect and an appeal can be filed against that order. Then the recovery proceedings will not be initiated. Another option is you have already paid the tax. You have intimated the department that the tax has been paid. Yet, due to oversight or for whatever reason, the department is of the belief that tax payment has been defaulted and they initiate recovery proceedings. Then this initiation of a recovery proceeding under any of the rules, any of the subsections of 79 is a decision of the adjudicating officer, and therefore an appeal can be filed against it under section 107 in my humble opinion. And the third option is wrongful seizure of property. Like I said earlier, seizure of property has to be done by passing an order under under form DRC 16. If you are of the opinion that the property is not found to be seized, it has been seized wrongfully by the department, you can file an objection like we discussed. If the proper officer is not satisfied, he will continue to seize the property. In that case, you can file an appeal with the appellate authority that was this seizure of property, this order under form DRC 16 is illegal, is incorrect, and therefore I want to file an appeal with this. So these are the options available with the assessee pertaining to the appeal. And the another option is payment in installment under section 80. Section 80 allows the assessee to apply for payment of tax in monthly installments. An application will have to be filed under form DRC 20 to the commissioner, and commissioner, on being satisfied that the liquidity position of the assessee is not very well, he can allow the assessee to pay tax in installments. However, certain criteria are there. This facility cannot be allowed, will not be allowed for tax payment under monthly returns. So if you don't have the money to file GSTR 3B, then you cannot make an application under section 80. It is available only when an order has been passed and the tax has been determined to be paid by you. This facility will be available only for a tenure of maximum 24 months, not more than that. It can be less than 24 months, 10 months, 12 months, 15 months, or 24 months, but it cannot be for 36 months, 25 months, or any such period. It will be restricted to 24 months. Interest will be paid. It will be considered as a delayed payment of tax, and interest under Section 50 will be applicable on the SSC. And if, say, for example, I have been afforded this facility by the department and I default in making payment of even a single installment, then the entire amount shall become payable forthwith, and it will be recoverable under Section 79. Recovery proceedings will be initiated without even giving me a notice. So let's understand this by way of an example. Mr. A, our regular defaulter, he has defaulted. He has to pay an amount of rupees 1 lakh to the government. An order has been passed to that extent. He makes an application to the commissioner that please extend me the facility to make payment in installments. And the commissioner, on being satisfied, allows him to make payment of rupees 10,000 each month for the next 10 months along with interest. So how will the calculation, how will be the interest calculated on this? In the first month, the outstanding liability is rupees 1 lakh. Tax at the rate of 18% for 1 month will be 1,500. This 1,500 along with his monthly installment of 10,000 will have to be paid on 11. Will have to be paid. So total 11,500 will be paid. In the second month, the outstanding liability is only 90,000 because 10,000 has already been paid. Interest on that 90,000 will be rupees 1,350.
वॉल्यूम एकदम कम हो गया.
And along with the installment.
फोन है कि क्या क्या वाला. तो वही मैं सोच रहा हूँ कि क्या करूँ.
Hello. Girish bhai, am I audible, Girish bhai?
Yes, Deep.
Okay, fine. So as I was saying, in the second month, the outstanding amount is only 90,000. Interest on that at 18% will be 1,350. Tax installment is 10,000. We will pay 11,350. So on and so forth in the third month as well. Now, when it comes to the fourth month, assume that the assessee defaults in payment of tax. The entire 70,000 which was payable, because he's paid 3 installments, so 30,000 has been paid. The balance 70,000 will be payable immediately on default, and they will be recovered under Section 79 without issuing any further notice to the assessee. Certain restrictions have also been placed under Rule 158. It says that if recovery proceedings have already been initiated against the assessee, if he has already been considered to be a defaulter under the Act, then he cannot go and say that please give me the facility under Section 80. If the facility has already been denied to the applicant under previous financial year, then he cannot again apply for this facility in the current financial year. He will have to wait for the next financial year to apply for this facility. And the tax amount has to be at least rupees 25,000 or more than that. If it is 24,000, 20,000, then this facility is not available to the assessee under Section 81. Sorry, Section 80. That is, this is about the recovery proceedings under Section 79. With this, I head into another wide power available to the department under Section 83, and that is provisional attachment. Section 83 of the CGST Act allows the commissioner to provisionally attach any property, including bank account, belonging to an assessee, if during the pendency of proceedings under Section 62, 63, 64, 67, 73 or 74 of the Act are pending. So when proceedings under any of these 6 sections are ongoing against the assessee, the commissioner is of the opinion that it is necessary to attach the property to protect the interest of the revenue. Then the commissioner can pass an order for such provisional attachment in Form DRC 22. Once that order has been passed, it will have a validity period of 1 year. After 1 year, that order will expire. After passing the order, he will have to communicate that encumbrances be created on that property. He will have to communicate it to the relevant authority, the revenue authority, transport authority, etc. However, if the person whose property has been attached is of the opinion that this property has been wrongly attached by the commissioner, then he has the option to file an objection within 7 days of such attachment to the commissioner. The commissioner will have to give him an opportunity of being heard, consider his representation, and after this opportunity, he will have to investigate that matter. And if he is satisfied that the property has been wrongly attached, he can release the property, or he can continue the provisional attachment of the property. In case the attached property is of perishable nature or of hazardous nature, any particular chemical, any shelf goods like vegetables or any other similar goods with an expiry date are of perishable nature, the commissioner has 2 options. He can either offer the assessee to pay the market value of the goods or the tax which may become payable by the assessee on the future date. Remember, the proceedings are pending. The order has not been passed, so the amount payable has not been determined. So the commissioner will have to estimate the tax which may become payable by the assessee in the future, or the market value of the goods, and give an option to the assessee that pay me that amount and release the goods. If the assessee does not exercise that option, then the commissioner can auction off those goods in the open market, issue a notice for that auction, and whatever money is collected, he can appropriate it towards the future liability of the assessee. Now, there are some important terms over here. First term is pending proceedings. The section has given clearly under which sections the proceedings have to be pending. If it is assessment of non-filers of returns, assessment of unregistered persons, assessment in certain summary assessment in certain cases, a case of search and seizure, or a regular assessment under section 73 or 74, where the assessee has not paid any tax or availed ineligible credits by way of fraud, suppression, misrepresentation, etc. Only when the proceedings are ongoing under either of these sections can the commissioner exercise his option of attachment under section 83. Now, one such case came with the Honorable Bombay High Court. Inspection for a case of fraud was initiated against one firm by the name of Maps Global Company. Their property was seized under section 83, and summons were issued to various parties under section 70 in connection to the inquiry. One such summon under section 70 was issued to a party called Kaish Impex Private Limited. During the pendency of this summon under section 70, the property of Kaish Impex was provisionally attached by the commissioner under section 83. A writ petition was filed by Kaish Impex, and Honorable Bombay High Court said that only when the act, when section 83 is so clear that provisional attachment can be done, only when proceeding under one of the 6 sections is pending. You cannot say that one person's proceeding is ongoing under section 67, and in that regard I will attach the property of some other person to whom I have issued the summons. A property will be attached only if the proceeding under section 67 or any of those sections is ongoing. If you have issued a summons, then you cannot attach the property. This is also a very important judgment. Now we must appreciate that Section 83 and the rules made under Section 83 give a very wide power to the commissioner. It is a very wide power wielded by the commissioner, and not adequate guidelines have not been issued by the government on exercise of such power. And that is why a lot of judgments, a lot of cases are traveling to the judiciary, the Honorable High Court under Article 226. And a lot of judgments are being given by the High Court, which we will discuss in the due course of time. So this was about pending proceedings. Another important term here is opinion of the commissioner. Section 83 says that when the commissioner is of the opinion that for the purpose of protecting the interest of government revenue, it is necessary to do so, he can attach any property of the assessee, including the bank account. Now, what is an opinion? The Act has not defined the term opinion, of course, because it is a very subjective term. Opinion changes from person to person. A person may like Salman Khan, another, that is his opinion. Another person may like Shah Rukh Khan, that is his opinion. The rules which have been issued by the government are also silent on this. They have not given any guidelines, any factors to be considered by the commissioner. And that is why this power, the term opinion, is very wide. If the commissioner believes that this, if I have a thought in my mind that person X may not be able to file the opinion, I don't have any evidence, but I have a thought that he may not be able to file, I can attach his property. As simple as that. That is the word opinion, because it is my opinion. I have the power, it is my opinion, I will seize his property. These matter regarding these questions have also traveled to the High Court under VAT regime. Gujarat VAT, Section 45 of Gujarat Act is pari materia to Section 83 of GST Act. So under Section 45 also these matters have traveled to the High Court. And currently under GST regime also matters have traveled to the Honorable High Court. And the High Courts have time and again issued guidelines to the commissioner. They have interpreted what is an opinion, when can an opinion be formed, and when can the commissioner actually attach the property provisionally under Section 83. A joint summary, I will present a joint summary of those judgments. First and the most common across all the judgments is that power of provisional attachment under Section 83 is a power of extraordinary nature and a very drastic power. It is a very strong power, and it has to be used only in extraordinary conditions where it is extremely required by the commissioner. You cannot use this power routinely. Every time you issue a show cause notice, every time you initiate a proceeding under the routine course of business, you cannot provisionally attach property under Section 83. This power has to be used in extraordinary circumstances only. Second guideline is, merely because the proceeding is pending is not a valid reason to attach property under Section 83. The prerequisite under Section 83 is that the commissioner should first form an opinion that it is necessary to do so under the Act. Only then he can proceed to provisionally attach the property. Third is, this opinion must be formed on the basis of some tangible and objective facts. The Gujarat High Court in one of the cases has categorically defined, has categorically spoken that forming an opinion is an action of the mind. It is an action of accepting a fact to be true. And a fact can be considered to be true only when there is any evidence, there is any reasonable opinion, piece of information available to say that this fact is true. And when you accept that fact to be true, only then you can form an opinion. This is a very important guideline given by the Honorable Court, because it harnesses a sense of responsibility on the commissioner to actually gather some tangible evidence before exercising his power under Section 83. The High Courts also say that some factors that may be considered by the commissioner while wielding his power is the background of the assessee, the history of the assessee, whether in the past is he an habitual offender of the law, what is the liquidity position of the assessee, what is the financial condition of the assessee, whether his financial condition is so weak that in future the department may not be able to recover that money, whether the assessee has been inspired by Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi, and he is a flight risk. He can flee the country or go underground, and the department may not be able to recover that money. Or any other similar piece of information, a reliable piece of information, probably say for example the credit rating of the assessee has been downgraded, or he has made default in payment of loan. Any of those conditions where it makes the commissioner believe that at a future stage, when the proceedings are concluded, department will not be in a position to recover that amount from the assessee. Only then you initiate attachment proceedings under Section 83. And last but the most important piece of guideline given by the court, most important in my opinion, is court says that when exercising power under Section 83, the authority must try and ensure that balance is maintained between the interest of the revenue and interest of the trade, interest of the business. In its sheer enthusiasm, the department should not go so ahead that it brings the entire business of the assessee to a standstill. Because if that happens, then the assessee will not be able to generate revenue. If he does not generate revenue, no further tax will be payable to the department. An entire ecosystem may get damaged. The customers, the suppliers, banks, everything will get damaged. The department may damage the entire ecosystem. So don't go so far in your enthusiasm that you bring an entire ecosystem to a halt. Maintain a balance. If you want to, if you estimate that the tax amount would be around 10 crores, you seize property around 12 crores, 15 crores to safeguard your interest. Don't go so to the extent of attaching 100 crores, 200 crores, or attaching the entire balance sheet of the assessee. Don't do that, because you will damage the entire ecosystem, and instead of safeguarding your interest, you will lose further revenue in doing so. Right? So these are the 5 guidelines that I think form the pillar on which the opinion shall be formed by the commissioner. Next is whether this power under Section 83 can be delegated by the authority. Section 167 of CGST Act says that whenever any function has to be undertaken by the commissioner, he can delegate it to a subordinate officer. And similar act was done by the Gujarat State Tax Commissioner. He delegated this authority under Section 83 to a subordinate officer, to a junior officer. Junior officer provisionally attached the property of one company by the name of Valerius Industries. This matter traveled to the High Court, and High Court has gone into detail as to why this power has been given to the commissioner. Like I said, the High Court has held that the power under Section 83 is an extraordinary and a drastic power. The High Court says that the reason why legislature has exuded confidence under the commissioner is because this power requires a high degree of discretion, and the legislature, the parliament, is confident that only the commissioner has that level of peculiar skill, that level of judgment to know when is it right to exercise this power under Section 83 and when it is not required to exercise power under Section 83. And therefore, delegation of this power under Section 167 by the commissioner is incorrect, and this opinion has to be formed by the commissioner and the order has to be passed by the commissioner himself. Now, this is the interpretation of the Gujarat High Court. It is possible that some other High Court may take a different stand. They may place more reliance on section 167 and say that no, if the commissioner has the peculiar skill and judgment to form an opinion under section 83, he even has the skill to know who is the proper officer to whom power under section 83 can be delegated, and therefore court need not interfere with his power under section 167. But as time being, as per my information, this is the law of the land across the country, and this judgment will have to be followed by the commissioner unless it is challenged in front of some other high court or with the Honorable Supreme Court. Filing of objection. Like we discussed earlier, the person whose property has been attached has the option to file an objection within 7 days. What can be done if he has delayed and he files an objection beyond 7 days? Delhi High Court says that when the objector himself, his property has been attached, he is already suffering adverse consequences. So by delaying the objection or delaying the filing of objection beyond 7 days, he has nothing to gain. And the department is also not at a loss because they have already seized the property. So 7 days is merely directional. Under the law, it is not a mandatory time limit. So even if he is filing after 7 days, after 14 days, after 1 month, after 6 months, you accept that objection and investigate that objection. It is okay. Another one of the most important aspects again over here, which we need to ensure it does not happen with us if God forbid any of our property gets provisionally attached, is the expiry of order. Section 83 says that the validity of an order Section 83 says that validity of an order of the provisional attachment shall be for a period of 1 year. So what happens at the end of the 1 year? Kolkata High Court, in a very, very excellent judgment in the case of Amazonite Steel, has said that the section has not given what is to be done at the end of 1 year. Therefore, it is safe to assume that at the end of 1 year, this order of provisional attachment will automatically expire. If the department, if the commissioner is of the opinion that the provisional attachment needs to be continued, then he will have to freshly assess the condition, freshly assess the circumstances at the end of the 1 year and pass us another order for provisional attachment. The order will not be automatically extended. And another important and superb guideline given by the High Court is that extension cannot be done under the garb of a fresh order. You will have to actually evaluate and justify that even after 1 year, why is it absolutely necessary for the department to continue the provisional attachment. Now, what is the remedy available to the assessee if his property has been attached under section 83? One, we discussed, of course, that he can file an objection with the commissioner. Commissioner will hear him out and then accordingly take a decision. Assuming that commissioner is not convinced with you and he has continued with the provisional attachment. Now, what can you do? As we already discussed earlier, section 107 of the CGST Act says that when any person is aggrieved by any order of the adjudicating authority, he can file an appeal under section 107. First question is whether is this an order? Yes, DRC 22 is an order. Or sorry, DRC 23, whatever is the form, I'm sorry, is an order under the Act. Under the CGST Rule 159, it is an order. And that is why appeal can be filed against that. Second question is the commissioner an adjudicating authority? The term adjudicating authority has been defined in section 2(4) of the CGST Act. And it says that adjudicating authority means any officer of the department who has been authorized to pass an order under the Act. Section 83 authorizes the commissioner to pass an order under the Act. So he is a adjudicating authority. Section 24 has made certain specific exclusions, that CBIC, Divisional Authority, Advanced Ruling Authority, Appellate Advanced Ruling Authority, and the National Anti-Profiteering Authority shall be outside the scope of adjudicating authority. Commissioner or any other officer above the rank of commissioner has not been specifically excluded, so he continues to be an adjudicating authority. He passes an order under Section 83. So ideally and strictly speaking in legal terms, his appeal is his order is appealable under Section 107. However, when you go further, Rule 109A has been prescribed by the central government for formation of appellate authority. This rule is categorical in terms of with whom the appeal is to be filed. It says that when an order has been passed by an officer of the rank of joint commissioner or an additional commissioner, he will file an appeal with the commissioner appeal. And when an order has been passed by an officer of the rank of assistant commissioner or a deputy commissioner, appeal will have to be filed with the joint commissioner appeal. This rule, it is very surprising that this rule has not foreseen a situation where an order of the commissioner will be appealed against. Now, what is the legal problem over here or a technical problem over here? Joint commissioner is the subordinate officer to the commissioner. First of all, he will not accept an appeal against the order of a commissioner because the rule does not allow him to do that. And even if for whatever reason he does, he is a subordinate of the commissioner. He's for all practical purposes, an employee of the commissioner in that jurisdiction. And it is very difficult to foresee a scenario where he will adjudicate this appeal with an independent frame of mind. So even if an appeal, first of all, appeal will not be cannot be filed. Even if it has been filed, it will not yield any results, any benefit. Now comes the whether can an appeal be filed with commissioner appeals. Under Income Tax Act, under excise, under service tax, under customs, it is already an established principle that commissioner and commissioner appeals are parallel authorities. And whenever an order of the commissioner has to be appealed against, it cannot be done with the parallel authority. It has to be done with the higher authority of the stature of a tribunal. Now the lacuna in the law here is an appeal to the appellate tribunal, which is the authority after appellate authority under Section 112, can be only filed against an order of the appellate authority. That is the fun part over here. Appeal against the commissioner appeal can be filed against Section 107, but no guidelines have been given, no rules have been issued to that extent. Now, once an appeal cannot be filed with the appellate authority, an appeal against with the tribunal against the order of appellate authority cannot be filed. So this is a lacuna of the tribunal, lacuna in the drafting of the law. Now, one question comes to the mind whether the legislature does not want you to file an appeal against under Section 83, against the order passed by the commissioner under Section 83. The answer to that question lies in Section 121 of the CGST Act. Section 121 of the CGST Act has laid down certain orders which are not appealable. First is the transfer of proceedings from one officer to another officer. Second is seizure of goods, books of accounts, registers, or any other document. Seizure of books of accounts, registers, or any other document. Order sanctioning prosecutions, that is jail term or criminal punishment. And order under Section 80, that is payment in installments. Other than these four orders, the legislature intends to allow filing of appeal against every other order which is passed under this act. However, central government has not given any any mechanism to file that appeal against the order of commissioner. That is a lacuna of law. And as the law stands presently, the only option available with the assessee is to file a writ petition with the Honorable High Court under Article 226 of the Constitution. The Karnataka High Court, in the case of Nayaz Ahmed, had an opportunity to analyze this position of the law. The question was raised to the lawyer of the petitioner that have you exhausted all your remedy under the Act? For the unaware, I'll just share one important principle. When you're filing a writ petition with the court, it can only be done when all your existing remedies have been exhausted under the law. Otherwise, the High Court will not admit your petition. They will say that no, first you go exhaust your appeal under the law and follow the proper procedure of filing an appeal with the High Court. Don't bypass the law and come directly to me for the benefit by way of filing a writ petition. Similar question was raised to the lawyer in the case of Nayaz Ahmed. However, from the judgment of the High Court, it seems that unfortunately that the lawyer has not been able to explain this position of the law, and therefore the matter was remanded to the appellate authority, and what further steps have been taken has not been come to the public forum. But this was a judgment where some hope was there that High Court could have set the matter straight. Now again, one such similar matter will come, and we'll have to see what the High Court does. So this is in respect of provisional attachments. Now one important case, one very important matter here is provisional attachment, proceedings of provisional attachment can be done only till the period the proceedings are pending. Once the order has been passed under section 72, 73 or any of those sections, the proceeding is no longer pending and the property becomes released automatically. Recovery proceedings under section 79 cannot be initiated until the period of 3 months is lapsed. So today, if the order has been passed, the provisional attachment expires. Until another period of 3 months, the recovery proceedings cannot be initiated. So definitely a situation can arise where the assessee can outsmart the government. In those 3 months period, his property is free of any encumbrances. He will sell off the property and go underground. The legislature has foreseen this situation, and in section 81 has said that whenever an order has been passed, then you cannot create a charge on the property, or you cannot transfer a property belonging to you with an intention to defraud the government. So I cannot in my mind say that I am being smart and I am selling my property and I will go away. Section 81 says that no, such a transfer or such a creation of charge on that property will be void. It will be deemed as if the transaction has never happened. The property will continue to belong to the defaulter, and government can initiate recovery proceedings on that property. However, the section 81 further provides that this will not be applicable. That is, the transfer will not be considered as void if such transfer of property has been done under good faith, for an adequate consideration, and without the notice of tax being payable. So like I said earlier, in a corporation or in a company of a suitable size, the tax department and the business department is always separate. The orders are received by the tax department, appeal is filed by the tax department, and the business transactions of selling, purchasing property or entering into business deals have been done by management level, higher management level, who are not aware of these daily day-to-day happenings that an order has been received and tax has been payable. In that case, the Act says that okay, if you have done it in good faith, if you have done it for adequate consideration, or even with the prior permission of proper officer, then section 81 will not be applicable to you. This is my presentation with respect to section 79 and section 83. Now, one very important and one very popular mode of recovery or a proceeding that has been undertaken by the department of late is blocking of the ITC under Rule 86A. Notification 75 by 2019 has been issued by the central government and which has introduced Rule 86A. Rule 86A empowers the commissioner or any other officer authorized by the commissioner to block the ITC balance appearing in the electronic credit ledger of the assessee if such empowered officer is of the belief, he has reasons to believe that this ITC has been availed fraudulently under certain circumstances by following a particular modus operandi. What is the background of introducing this rule? Earlier, in the case of Valerius that we discussed, and in the case of another party called Alpha Enterprises, along with provisionally attaching the bank account of the assessee under section 83, the department had also proceeded to block the ITC balance of the assessee. The matter travelled to Honorable Gujarat High Court, and Gujarat High Court categorically said that blocking of ITC by the department is without any backing of the law. It is illegal, and therefore you cannot do it to release the credit balance immediately, unblock the credit balance immediately. To provide sanctity to these actions of the department, of the commissioner or any other officer, to allow them to continue blocking the ITC, government ultimately came out with notification number 75 by 2019. Now, what are the criteria or what are the conditions in which this credit can be blocked? Rule 86A says that whenever, I will again reiterate this, whenever the commissioner has reasons to believe that the assessee has fraudulently availed certain credit, in cases where ITC availed is on an invoice which has been issued by a non-existing supplier, that is issued by a shell company, or on a supply which has not been received by the assessee. You may all recall that section 16(2) imposes a condition that for availing the credit, the supply has to be received. So if the commissioner has reasons to believe that without receiving such supply, I have fraudulently availed the credit, then he can proceed to block my credit. If the tax has not been paid on an invoice and I have still availed the credit, then he can move forward and block the credit. Another criteria under section 16(2) that tax be paid on an invoice. Third is the person who is availing the ITC is non-existent. This is mainly aimed towards shell firms, that if there is a ring of invoices, a ring of transactions where multiple parties are not present, they are only on paper, fictitious parties or shell firms as they're popularly known, then they can proceed against them. Or the person is not in possession of the invoice. Now the fourth one is very important. Whenever GSTR1 is whenever an invoice is issued by a supplier, he is required to declare that invoice on GSTR1 by the matching concept envisaged under the Act. This invoice will be reflected under GSTR2A. If the invoice is not reflected in GSTR2A, the department assumes that tax has not been paid or the invoice is not available with me, and department can believe that you have availed this credit fraudulently and can block your credit under Rule 86A. Now the problem is GSTR2A was not functional for quite a period of time. A lot of assessees in the initial stages of the GST, or even, it is surprising to know, even now after 3 years, are facing a difficulty to file the returns, or they have not filed GSTR1, or the details of the invoices and the details appearing in GSTR2A are not matching. Even if I am a bona fide purchaser, I'm a bona fide businessman, I have genuinely paid the tax to my supplier. If this invoice is not appearing in 2A, department will say that tax has not been paid and I will block your credit. And this is what I have practically seen in a couple of clients' cases. And it is really difficult to get them to unblock the credit. It is running from pillar to post. And even after 6 months, no relief has been given by the department. The rule further says that whatever reasons you believe to exist to block the credit, these reasons have to be recorded in writing. This block of credit will have a validity of 1 year. It will cease to exist after 1 year. After 1 year, the credit must be unblocked. And even before the period of 1 year, if you are satisfied that the condition is no longer existing, then you can unblock the period. The period of 1 year is at the discretion of the commissioner or the empowered officer. Now there are certain important terms used in Rule 86A. First is reasons to believe. Under the GST Act, as far as I am aware, this term appears only in 2 places. One is Section 67, which allows the Joint Commissioner to conduct search, seizure, inspection of any property, and under Rule 86A. Reasons to believe is a very wide term. It has not been defined under the Act, and it is not a common feature under the indirect tax regime. However, it has been used in Section 147 of the Income Tax Act. Section 147 of the Income Tax Act says that whenever the assessing officer has reasons to believe that a particular income has escaped assessment, he can reopen the assessment. I'm not a direct tax guy, so this is only the summary of what I know of Section 147. The technical jargon, maybe please excused. But the crux is, the term reasons to believe has been used in Section 147 of Income Tax Act, and a lot of cases have traveled to the judiciary as to what is the interpretation of the term reasons to believe. The apex court, the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court, in the cases of Aslam Muhammad Merchant, has held that for there to be a reason to believe, there has to be a specific, relevant and solid information with the assessing officer. Specific, solid and relevant information with the assessing officer. Now you guys may recall that sometime back we discussed similar criteria for Section 83 as well, where the commissioner is required to form an opinion on the basis of tangible and specific information. So here we can assume, it is safe to assume that reasons to believe is at par with the opinion that is required to be formed under Section 83. And if he has any reasons to believe, it has to be on the basis of tangible evidence, specific and relevant information and reliable information. That is the term reasons to believe. Another very important term is fraudulently availed. How do you decide what is fraudulently availed? Because for departments, it is possible that any taxpayer could be fraudulently availing the taxpayer. And with the cases with the jugards, so-called jugards that we do in the industry, the department also in certain cases cannot be blamed for assuming that every taxpayer is a fraud. The term fraudulent, fraud per se, has been used in Section 11 AC of Central Excise Act, Section 73(5) of the Finance Act, that is the Service Tax, under the Customs Act, and under Section 74 of the CGST Act. The Supreme Court and other courts and tribunals have time and again held that in order to say that a person has fraudulently behaved, there has to be a positive activity done by the assessee. There has to be evidence that the assessee has behaved in a malified manner with an intent to evade payment of tax or wrongfully avail SENVAT credit. So the department will have to actually prove that that particular activity of the assessee seems to be with an intention, with a malified intention to evade payment of tax, or in this case wrongfully avail SENVAT credit. And these in our opinion are the positive acts done by the assessee. So in a nutshell, if we are to summarize Rule 86A to make it simple for understanding, it means that the empowered officer can proceed to block the ITC of the assessee only if he has any specific, reliable and relevant information on the basis of which he has formed reasons to believe that the assessee has acted in a malified manner, knowingly acted in a malified manner with an intent to avail ineligible input tax credit, which would otherwise not be available to him. And these reasons are recorded by the empowered officer in writing. Only then can they proceed to block my credit under Rule 86A. Now, Rule 86A also is not free of issues, not free of policies. Some of the issues I would like to discuss over here is, first is there is an essence of there is an element of arbitrary action by the department. The proceedings under Rule 86A can be held in violation of principle of natural justice. In my humble opinion, it is ultra vires the CGST Act, that is, it is beyond the CGST Act. It empowers the commissioner to initiate parallel proceedings under the same law. And there is not clarity whether it is deriving power under Section 49 of the CGST Act. The first issue, arbitrary action by the department. Like we discussed earlier, the reasons for which the empowered officer is blocking my credit have to be recorded by him in writing. But the rule does not require him to intimate the assessee as to why his credit is being blocked. If the empowered officer or the commissioner has reasons to believe, he can write it on a piece of paper, so to say, keep it on his drawer and block the credit. Assessee will have no idea that his credit has been blocked. He will go on the 20th of the month to file the return and he will find that credit has been blocked. Now he will have to, at the last moment, arrange cash to file his return. This will cause serious injury to the people, to the assessee, even into bona fide taxpayers. It is very much possible that a bona fide taxpayer may not be able to file his return on time and he may have to bear interest and late fees because the department has not intimated the assessee of the action taken by them. Second is, Rule 86A does not require the assessee to be heard, the representation of the assessee to be considered, or the opportunity of being heard to be given to the assessee. And that is why it is very much possible, the combined effect of these lack of intimation under the act, under the rule, is that department may take arbitrary action, though the intention of the department may not be to harass a genuine taxpayer. A genuine bona fide taxpayer may suffer at the hands of the department unwillingly, without any fault of his, by this act of the department. Another related issue is principle of natural justice. Now, it is a well-established principle that SENVAT credit under the erstwhile regime and input tax credit under the GST regime is a right of the assessee. When he is paying tax on a particular input, he is allowed under the act to avail credit and utilize that credit for discharging his tax liability. So it is a right of the assessee. It is an established law that whenever you are curtailing the right of the assessee, a principle of natural justice has to be followed. You have to give the assessee the right to be heard, of representing his position before you proceed to curtail his right. Even the Supreme Court, in the case of Kesar Enterprises, in this present case, Supreme Court has relied on an earlier judgment of 1980s in the case of Swadeshi cotton mill, and held that, I will read out that relevant extract. It says that principles of natural justice require the opportunity of being heard to be afforded to the assessee before passing an order, irrespective of whether that requirement of hearing has been mandated in the law or not. The effect of this judgment is that even if Rule 86(8) does not require the assessing officer to give an opportunity to give a hearing to the assessee, since the assessing officer is curtailing the right of the assessee, he is required to give him an opportunity of being heard, even if it is not there in Rule 86(8). So by not giving that, the principles of natural justice are violated, and any action taken by the department in violation of that principle is void. Third, and one of the most important points for me personally, is that Rule 86(a) is ultra vires the CGST Act. What does ultra vires mean? Ultra vires means it is beyond the scope of Act. Article 265 of the Constitution says that the government cannot collect any tax from the assessee without a specific power under the law, without express permission of the legislature, without passing a bill without passing an act under the parliament. And only if it is specifically mentioned in the act, only then you can collect the tax from the citizens of the country. The line, it is a single 5-worded line, but it is very important. Tax cannot be collected from the citizen without the authority of law. This is a single line, Article 265 under the Constitution, but it speaks volumes for me. Now, Section 16 of the CGST Act entitles an assessee to avail ITC that has been paid on the inward supply of goods, services, capital goods, etc. Section 16(2) lays down certain conditions, and on fulfillment of those conditions, I am eligible to avail the credit. The Section 17 of CGST Act has listed down certain criteria or certain situations on which I shall be liable to reverse the credit, or certain categories of input services under Section 17(5) for which ITC should not be available to me. So if I pass the test of eligibility under Section 16(2) and I am not liable to reverse it or not avail the credit under Section 17(5), there is no other section in the law which requires me to not avail the credit or empowers the government, empowers the department to block this credit. There is no power whatsoever under the Act, under any section of the Act. It is a right considered, like I discussed, it is a right given by the law, by the legislature to an assessee. And legislature has not allowed the department to block that right. And therefore, to my humble opinion, to my view, Rule 86(a) is definitely ultra vires the Act. And another interesting aspect to this is that, like I said, Rule 86(a) was introduced by Notification 75/2019. This notification has been issued by the government under Section 164 of the CGST Act. What does Section 164 say? Section 164 says that government is empowered to notify proceedings for any of the functions under this Act. Now there is no express permission to the government to block the ITC. So how can they notify the proceedings for such blocking under Section 164? And therefore, since there is no power to issue this notification under 164, the notification itself is void ab initio, and the rule can be said to have never come into existence in the first place. And any proceedings undertaken by the department under this Rule 86(a) is void, is illegal, and 110% the judiciary will have to step up, because like I discussed earlier, it is an action taken by the commissioner. and no appeal can be filed against that in the present form of the law. If it is filed by a lower authority, then you can file an appeal with the adjudicating authority under section 107 and follow the due procedure of the law, and it has to be seen as to where this matter gets resolved, tribunal, high court, supreme court. Or if it has been done by the commissioner himself, then you will have to go for a writ immediately. Another very important consideration is parallel proceeding. Section 74 of the CGST Act says that whenever an assessee has availed ineligible credit by way of fraud, suppression, misrepresentation, then a show cause notice has to be issued to him under section 74 and the matter has to be adjudicated by the proper officer. Surprisingly, Rule 86A as well says that when the commissioner has reasons to believe that certain ineligible credit has been availed fraudulently, then he can proceed to block the credit. Now, when the commissioner already has reasonable belief, that is, he has substantial facts, substantial evidence to say that I have availed ineligible credit by way of fraud, he should directly initiate proceedings under section 74. And if you believe that I'm a flight risk or I'm a habitual offender, he can seize my property, he can provisionally attach my property under section 83. So why is the department again coming up and empowering the commissioner to initiate parallel proceedings under Rule 86A also? You want the commissioner to initiate proceedings under Rule 86A, which does not have any backing of the law. It has been noted, it has been even observed by the Gujarat High Court that there is no backing of the law, and you're empowering him to initiate parallel proceeding by bypassing the entire adjudication process under section 74. This can never be the intention of the law. This can never be the procedure of the law. This can never be the intention of the legislature to allow parallel proceedings under the same law for the same matter. And that is why Rule 86A again on this footing also will lose. The judiciary will have to strike this off. In my humble opinion, of course, the judiciary is a wise authority, is the highest wisdom of the land, and it will do whatever is convinced and as is represented to it. But if genuine representations are made by there are very notable and able lawyers in the fraternity who I am sure will take this argument with the judiciary, and the judiciary will be convinced that Rule 86A needs to be struck down. One fair bit of controversy under the Act is Section 49. There is a confusion and there is a lack of clarity whether government has power under Section 49 to notify this section. Section 49(4) of the CGST Act empowers the government to prescribe conditions after which subject to which the assessee shall utilize the ITC. The heading of Rule 86A says that conditions for utilization of ITC. So department can very well say that we have the power under Section 49(4) to notify the conditions for utilization of ITC. But if you read Rule 86A, it does not notify any condition. It notifies only circumstances in which the credit can be blocked. Now, what is a condition? We all know in general parlance, condition is that on fulfillment of a particular thing, I will be eligible or ineligible for another thing. Like if I want to purchase a phone, the condition is that I have to pay 10,000 rupees. If I pay 10,000 rupees, I can buy that phone. Right? The Rule 86A nowhere has prescribed any condition. It has only prescribed circumstances in which the department can block the credit. So is it fair enough to say, is it wise to say that the rule has been notified under Section 49(4)? Frankly, I don't have the answer. But my prima facie view is that there is no condition, there is only criteria. And therefore, Rule 86A is not in the right spirit of Section 49(4). As the law stands presently, a writ petition has been filed in the case of Jariwala Sales Private Limited with the Honorable Gujarat High Court. it was due to be heard in April or May, somewhere around April or May, but due to the coronavirus lockdown, it has been adjourned and further hearing has not been taken place. This, my friends, my senior members, senior respected members, is my presentation with respect to safeguards available to the department under the law to protect its interest, to protect its revenue. Like I said, even during my presentation, there are a lot of gray areas, a lot of vague areas on which clarification is required, and on which judiciary or the government proactively, or when the matter travels to the judiciary, a clarity will have to be given. With that, I conclude my seminar. I once again thank you, Dadari CPE Study Circle, for giving me this opportunity of addressing a distinguished crowd of such as yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Deep Chheda. I request Misha Gala to give a well-deserved vote of thanks. Before that, I want to make few announcements. We have a next CP Study Circle meeting, which is planned on Code of Ethics in the next week. And all members are requested to note that the CP credits will be available only to the Dadar East CP Study Circle members, and request to attend the entire session. And also, I request you to go through the instruction which is posted on the group. Thank you. I request CA Misha Gala to take the vote of thanks. Over to Misha Gala.
Hello. Oh, yeah, sorry, I was not able to hear others. So yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity to give a well-deserved vote of thanks. So I, on behalf of Dadari CP Study Circle and all of us present here, would like to extend a hearty vote of thanks to Mr. Deep Chheda for his time and sharing his findings and opinions on trial for recovery, attachment and blocking of ITC and the GST. I'm sure his insights and the case studies, his opinions shared will be of great help to all of us. Thank you, Deep, on behalf of the entire fraternity.
It has been a pleasure for me, Misha. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Deep. Thank you. We are ending the session here. Thank you all members for joining and making this session a successful session. Thank you, Deep. We'll come back again on any of the topics on GST. Thank you very much.
Sure. Anytime, Girish.